Welcome everyone. You're in the right place to see what's new in Autodesk Revit 2019 with your presenter, Vince Daniele. Vince, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jana, and welcome everyone to our presentation. I'm glad you could take a bit of time out today on a Friday to watch this presentation. There's some pretty cool stuff that was added to Revit 2019. Some things to get excited about, some other things that are they're okay, but yeah, we'll take the next 50 minutes to explain these new features, and I'll demonstrate some of them. And at the end of my presentation, I'm going to try to leave about 10 minutes to answer any of the questions that you might have for us. So I might be jumping a little bit back and forth between the presentation and Revit to demonstrate some of these new features, but I'm going to go through things in a specific order here. So this year in the presentation, we're kind of categorizing the different additions and upgrades to Revit into these 6 different categories. Some of the features to strengthen current workflows, some to modernize current workflows. There are some automated processes that were added to Revit 2019. Connect goes over any interoperability between other programs. Create covers features within the disciplines to create some different stuff or just enhancements to creating objects in Revit. And then finally, information, how we can inform our customers and provide information from our Revit drawings. A little bit light in the connect and inform categories, as you'll see as I go through the presentation, but there is some pretty good stuff to strengthen workflows. And I think in this release, you'll realize pretty quickly that there's a lot of enhancements that people have been asking just in general for the user interface to enhance workflow that unfortunately have taken a long time to become integrated into Revit. But now that they're there, I think they'll be really helpful for just navigating projects. So this is just a quick cut sheet. I'm not going to go through every bullet point here, but just in general to summarize what I'm going to cover today, here's the different topics that are going to be covered under those main categories. So unfortunately, no, I'm not going to get into anything really specific about fabrication parts or any of the extra utilities that can be added into Revit. We've got quite a few things to cover in this next hour, just in the general enhancements to the program. But if you are interested in any of those additional add-ins or anything, please reach out to us. We've got people on the team that are really experienced within their specific disciplines, and they can demonstrate those personally for you. So, oh, and also all of the slides that I'm covering here, we will provide a PDF that you can access. So the whole PowerPoint presentation that I'm going through, you'll have access to. So if I go through anything too quick, or if you wanted to reference back to the PowerPoint, we will provide that PDF or this PDF of the presentation for you. Okay. All right, so the first area that I'm going to talk about is Modernize. And the Modernize are updates that help create a modern and effortless experience. Okay. So initially here, this is one of my favorite things. And so the first thing I'm going to talk about is one of my favorite things that they've included into Revit 2019. And it's this idea or this feature of having tabbed views within Revit. So in the past, when we would open views up in Revit, everyone knows that it's used Revit, they kind of stack up on top of each other where they're in the background. Well, now with Revit, when we start to open up different views, whether it's in the current project that you're working in, or if you have multiple projects or families open at the same time, the views will show as tabbed at the top of the view window. So let me jump out of here real quick. I planned on doing these kind of after each section, but this is a pretty big one, so I just wanted to show this real quick. So you can see here in this project I have open that the view name is actually at the top of your view window to the top left, and it appears as a tab. When you double click to open up a view like you normally would in Revit, instead of just opening up that new view on top of the previous, it adds a tab to that that whole view screen or the whole view window. So now switching between open views is really easy. You don't have to use your hotkey Control Tab to switch through views. You can just go right to the tab, and you can have multiple views open across this view window. Let's jump back to this. And closing them, let me see, closing them, pretty straightforward. We can close those views. If you go to close the last view that you have open in the project, you're still going to get, not in my example, because I hadn't changed anything, but if we do edit any of the project at all, you'll still get that pop-up. So let me just move this tree to a different spot. If you go to close the last view open that you have in the project, if anything has changed, you will still get this pop-up. So pretty much the behavior is the same. We just get new tabs that are easier to navigate through. And there are a couple of other things I might as well show them while I'm sharing Revit here that are huge for enhancing the way that we can control or look at views in Revit. First off, docking the tool palettes. I know whenever I train these classes, it can become difficult to when you're presenting, or if you're connected to a different display, a dual display, to dock some of these are really touchy. But now it gives you a really good indication when you go to the to anchor to the left or to the right side of the screen where those tool palettes are going. And that same behavior occurs when you start to move views around. So let me plop open a couple of views. If I want to tile these left and right, so I've got a ground floor and a second floor view open. If you click and drag on these tabs, you can actually drag out the window and start to dock them side by side or top to bottom. And a really cool thing about having these tabs is that when you open up a new view while you have one of these tabs active, it actually adds the tabs to whatever view you have active. So whatever view window you have active, it will add tabs to that view window. So we can have multiple sort of tabbing in a split screen environment like this. So if you're trying to edit, say, section view while you're working in a plan view, if I open up the section, try to get that to tab over there, okay. So anchor that to the right. We can work simultaneously, just like you could before with window tiling, but it does work a little bit easier, and you can still have window tiling with other views in the background. So maybe you have a section, overall building, and then another section for a wall section in there. If I go to open the wall section with the section view activated, it will just add a tab to this. So you can kind of simultaneously work a lot quicker while you're in the plan and different sections or different elevations at the same time that you're working in your active project. Now, another feature that we'll cover here in the PowerPoint, and I apologize, jumping back and forth between Revit and the PowerPoint, I'm going to have to keep clicking that. I guess I could do Alt-Tab, but this is huge. Multi-monitor support in Revit 2019. So in the past, all we could do is drag our palettes over onto another monitor. Well, now we can drag views over on another monitor. If you're utilizing multiple displays, this is a really big deal. You might have seen as I tried to drag my view over once I kind of unanchored that from the tab, that I could bring that off of the screen, and you can drag and drop that. If you had a dual monitor setup, obviously that's really tough to show in a presentation, but you can drag and drop that view onto another screen, and you can work simultaneously in the views, so you're just seeing a much cleaner picture of a larger view. So the example we have here in this slide is if you have, your plan views on the left and you wanted to see presentation or rendering on the right, you could always maximize that view. You can do this with any of the views. So you could have a schedule open on one screen, you can have the floor plan view open on another, and it just allows for a much cleaner workflow when you're working in the program. You don't have to extend your desktop or anything like that. Okay, so the next feature or product enhancement to modernize our workflows is, for those of you that have worked in conceptual massing in Revit. This is probably nothing new to you. I think it was in like 2011 or 2012 when in the conceptual massing family environment, we could display levels in 3D. I don't know why it took 8 years to get to this point, but now we can see levels in 3D views in Revit. So the levels display in 3D, you can select them, you can modify them, change their names, delete the levels, move them. So it's pretty cool. Instead of having to toggle between different views, elevation and 3D, you can do all of this in the 3D view. So once I get back to Revit, I'm going to go through the next few slides and then kind of demonstrate this stuff all at once. But we can display those 3D orthographic views and show the levels in those views. So little screenshot there.
Yep. Okay. Just wanted to check. Someone said they weren't seeing what they were supposed to, but now it looks like everything's caught up. Thanks.
Okay. I'll try to slow down a little bit. Also in 2019, Autodesk, for those of you that have worked on the visualization side of stuff, you know that the Autodesk material library is kind of the standard set of materials that come with Revit. Just recently, Autodesk has changed a lot of their workflows for visualization and are now supporting physically based materials. These physically based materials are available in Revit 2019, so we can get more realistic materials directly in Revit using ray trace or even having them display in a realistic visual style. But it's not for all of your materials across the board. So the old Autodesk materials, at least the ones from 2018, are still supported in 2019, but we do have a set of physically based materials, and I'll make sure to show you how those appear in the material asset browser and what the differences are. It's pretty clear, even on this slide that I have here, any of the materials that aren't the physically based materials will have this little, it's kind of an orange indicator in the bottom left corner of the material. If you can see that, I'll pull it up on Revit, but that indicates that it's a legacy material. It will still render, it will still look the way it did before, but if you're really trying to get that material dialed in and you want to make it look more realistic, we can use physically based materials within Revit for visualization. So just a couple of captures here. You can see the table on the left. Yeah, it's got some reflection, it looks okay, but on the right we can really start to see with a physically based material with the relief pattern and the texture map that's applied to it, you can start to see some of that wood grain and the texture that's included in the table in the physically based material by applying that as a material in Revit. Okay, some other things with these 3D views or visualization. Super easy toggling between perspective views and orthographic views. If you're creating views and you don't want them to be in perspective, it's now a view setting, so it's called projection mode within your view controls, or sorry, the view properties that you can change. So just projection mode in your normal view properties, change it from perspective to orthographic, and it will toggle between them. So let me jump back to the program and show you those. Let me just try to do this a little bit smoother this time. There we go. All right, so first off with the 3D stuff I mentioned, and let's maximize this view. Okay. Oh, and that's another thing I could just not even trying to. We can also maximize the view to take up your main or your primary monitor. So you have a lot more control with these view windows. But as you can see here, in the 3D view, we can select on levels, we can edit level name, level information, and if I do minimize this and kind of dock it back to the main screen, sorry, I'm just getting used to this just like everyone else here. So there we go. So you can click on a level and you can edit the properties on the fly while you're working in 3D views. Not a huge improvement, but hey, it was around in conceptual massing for a long time. Why not integrate it into our project workflows and have consistency between those environments. Okay. While I'm in this 3D view, I might as well show you that we can toggle between orthographic and perspective. So it just changes your projection between orthographic and perspective. And another thing that's great, I really like this for visualizing our projects, is that instead of having your camera views or these new orthographic / perspective views cropped onto your crop region, you can actually display this full window. So as you're working through the views, you're not having to toggle between and mess around with your crop regions. If you turn the crop region off, let's see. So you can see you can still use a crop region, but before, when we created cameras, you really had to mess around with your crop region to get everything that you want to see to fit into that field of view. Well, now you just turn off the crop region, it extends, it shows full screen, and it's a lot easier to navigate around those views, something that was kind of frustrating in the past. And then also, so with the materials, what I was talking about there, just to show you on the fly here. So our out-of-the-box sort of Autodesk materials are still included. They will have this little indicator in the bottom left corner when you're in your material browser to show you that they are older materials. If you're looking to bring in any physically based material, we can still search in the search bar at the top of the material browser. And as I scroll through here, any of them through the AEC materials that do not have that indicator are actually constructed as physically based materials. The only way that I've found, and someone out there might already know how to do this, but the only way that I've found to create a new material based off of one of these physically based materials is actually bringing in an existing from the library and then either duplicating it to create a new one and changing its properties to match what you're trying to do. If we go into identity and change the material class, it really doesn't change it from physical or Autodesk material, vice versa. So just to point that out there. If I go into appearance, change render settings, production, you can get a nice preview of that physically based material and the parameters that are here. You have a little bit more control, especially over the highlight control. So if we wanted to put any really, if you're creating a metal material or anything and you wanted to skew the reflection, you can mess around with these controls. So you have a little bit more control. Revit still isn't unlocking the same type of control that you would have in a program like 3D Studio Max. It simplifies these settings quite a bit, but you do have more that you can do with the materials, including more physically based relief patterns. I should actually use this one with paint. One of the paint actually has or wall texture, that's what I was thinking. Wall texture with an orange peel relief. So instead of me chasing down one of my textures, you can see that once this renders out, it does give a pretty good texture to it, kind of that, I guess, that paint finish or a little bit of that better relief pattern for a paint texture, where in the past with paint materials, you had the presets to choose roller and brush and all of that, but they didn't really give great render results, where these ones we can change quite a bit to dial them in. So same way you can change colors in here, so not too much has changed in terms of editing these presets, but the physically based materials will give you a much better render result when you render with the built-in ray trace render engine. Okay. All right, cool. This is also a pretty big improvement, the scope box. In Revit, we can actually use the scope box in 3D views. So a lot of these enhancements you're probably seeing a pattern here. A lot of the enhancements are for working in 3D views. But with the scope box, we can activate the scope box while working in 3D, and the scope box will section down to a section box. So just drag this open. So I've got the building here. We can see that there's a scope box present in this project. And in 3D view, if I want to activate that scope box, instead of turning a section box and trying to match it up with where your scope box is, just by applying the scope box in the view, it will section it down. Also, kind of a minor thing, but something that people would complain about quite a bit, is we can alphabetize now the scope boxes. So if you're using some type of labeling system for your scope boxes, putting a number or a letter out front really helps to organize. I'm actually not using any of these scope boxes on top of the project, but just built them in to show you how those are alphabetized. So scope box 1 here is what I'm using. I can control the scope box in 3D as long as I'm not applying the scope box, just like in your normal plans, elevations, or sections. If I turn the scope box off, you can select it and edit the extents of the scope box in the 3D view as well. That might be a little bit dangerous if you're trying to control a whole bunch of views in your projects using scope boxes, but it is an option now. So instead of having to chase down an elevation view to adjust the height, or a floor plan view to change the other left and right extents of the scope box, you can control this now in 3D. Okay, so we can cover now the feature enhancements that strengthen our current workflows. So a lot of this stuff, it's really just added to, like I said, strengthen or contribute to building a more solid foundation for the Revit product, both with reliability and efficiency. One of the first things that they've added in 2019 is the ability to create OR filters for views. So we can create multiple rules and rule sets within our views, and you can even nest some of these conditionals in the same filter. So what's the point of this? Well, in the past, we would have to either try to create multiple filters and then control them in the hierarchy of the view filter list in order for objects of the same category to display in certain ways. Well, now, instead of creating multiple filters, we can add conditionals to sort of filter out a subset of categories within the main Revit family category. A good example of this, I've got one of these views set up for view filters. Right now, I have highlighted with a view filter a couple of walls here. They're just filled in with a black fill. Well, I'm using one of those conditional filters to display the walls in different ways. Just give you a look at what this looks like here. So wall category filter. We've got function equals interior walls, or fire rating does not equal blank, structural usage equals bearing. So I've got this OR conditional that is a subset of the overall rule. So with the filter rule, first off, we're filtering out all of the interior walls, or any rule may be true, or I want to filter fire rating does not equal blank, structural equals bearing. So the result here when the filter is created, let me make these red. So right now, the wall on the left here, this is actually just a fire-rated wall. It does not function as a structural bearing wall, but the filter is still being applied to it. So First off, these are definitely interior walls. So Revit sees the function of that wall as an interior wall. But it is not a fire-rated wall, so I should have kept that open. Oh, I must have set this up here. Let me change that, blank that out. So it needed to accept both of those conditions in order for it to be highlighted. So if it's a bearing wall, or if it's a fire-rated wall, it's going to be highlighted with red. Because I took off the fire rating, it's not highlighting it anymore, even though it is an interior wall. It's a non-load bearing wall, but if I now, let's see, so it doesn't meet both of the criteria under interior walls to make that colored in red. If I change this to structural bearing wall, you can see that it automatically instantly changes because it contains one of those filter subsets. So the OR statement's nice because we can highlight things that might have one or the other condition as a valid condition. Actually, that's kind of weird. Change the type properties. There we go. They're all highlighted. Oh, that's right. I was getting myself a little bit confused. In the filter, it says fire rating does not equal blank. I was thinking that was equals 120, but it does not equal 120. So if I remove the fire rating from it, it removes it from the filter list. If I add the fire rating, it will add it. So just a different way of navigating. I'm just using a simple example here to show this, but if I do edit this partition wall type and change it to anything other than being blank, let's change it to it. We can filter out that way. So I was trying to think of a better example of showing this. It seems like with view filters, this is a very common way of doing fire ratings, so it's something that people are familiar with. So if we wanted to add some different conditionals to that, but the ability is there to create those conditional statements, and I'm sure having that once we run into some different things in Revit where we're trying to get stuff to display a certain way, you'll figure out different uses of the and or conditionals in the subset of the filter. Okay. So this just allows greater flexibility in designing filters to organize content in your views more efficiently. The next thing here, this might not be a big deal, but I know in creating Revit templates over the years, it becomes really frustrating when you're trying to create a certain graphic appearance and you've got to do things like create two fill patterns, set one to transparent, one to opaque, and then kind of layer those two separate fill patterns on top of each other. This is something that you're going to see in a lot of different dialog boxes now because the setting applies to a whole bunch of different things in the way that Revit objects display. So instead of having just one fill pattern that we can apply to a Revit category, now in cut patterns and in surface patterns, you can have two patterns loaded into those settings. So you can have a foreground pattern and a background pattern. So even in this slide here, you can see that if we have a diagonal pattern with a concrete pattern below it, we can start to layer up those patterns within the Revit categories. Without going into that too much, what I've realized is that as I go through visibility graphics, and this does take a little bit of getting used to since we're probably so familiar with the old dialog boxes, but when you do go to change things like cut patterns, you will now have two different ways of controlling how that pattern appears. So maybe let's do this with everything. Having a foreground pattern, something kind of light, like a diagonal. Let's make this orange. and background wood, cyan. So now everything that doesn't have the filter, you can see has that sort of double pattern assigned to it with the diagonal on top, way in here, and the wood grain below it. It must have come up enough where it was a feature that Autodesk felt was necessary to add to the program, so we have that now. And actually, interestingly, the foreground pattern is applying over the top of the filter, and the background pattern is not. So it's kind of interesting. I didn't realize that until zooming in there. So bringing those cut patterns to the front apparently does not, or it overrides the hierarchy of the view filter, which could be a good thing, might not be the best, but so just in terms of the graphic representation, having this ability through cut patterns and fill patterns, we can communicate design intent a little bit more easily with these more complicated sort of combination of fill patterns. I haven't tested this yet with color schemes, but I would assume that within a color scheme, let's see, I haven't placed any rooms, but I would assume you could probably do something similar with color patterns. This is what I get for trying to let's see, change something on the fly here. So this might work, it might not, but rooms. So it still looks like we can only assign one fill pattern to our color scheme. So unfortunately, you cannot layer with color schemes, so don't try to do that. Okay, this one is huge for company workflows. The next slide I'm about to show and demo for you. Actually, I skipped one. Take that back, I'll pause that. This is not that big of a deal, but maybe some of you will think it is. I've never run into where it's that critical that I have text vertically aligned, but when you do go to create text, let me go to my setup for this. So we had in the past where we could horizontally align text using the modify tab to change the orientation of the text. Well, they've actually added the ability to change top alignment, middle, or bottom alignment to these large bodies of text. So in the text, you can now change, if I want this text box to be bottom aligned, and set this one also to be bottom aligned. Now when we go to align our text, it will actually snap to the bottom, or if I highlight both, and in the properties, change the vertical alignment to middle. Now we can align text that way. So in the past, it was very easy to do top alignments, but now they've unlocked the API to allow us to do middle or bottom alignment. So yay. It's really tough when you don't get any feedback, with these big presentations, but that one, maybe someone out there is going ecstatic over this, but seems something that maybe should have been in a while ago, but okay, so this is the one that I was saying is pretty important. Whenever I train a Revit class, I always explain the importance of never deleting levels in your project unless you absolutely are sure you need to delete the level from the project. In the past, you always got that dialog box that you were deleting views when you go to delete a level. But now when you go to delete levels, it actually will inform you that along with deleting the level, you're also deleting a whole bunch of elements that are dependent on that level. So it gives you a warning that tells you, beyond just the views that you're deleting, you're also deleting a bunch of stuff that could be really important that someone has taken a lot of time to place in the project. So in an elevation here, if someone's new to Revit and they just don't want to see that level line, instead of hiding it, they go, oh, I'll just delete it. They're going to get this error message that says, along with the selection, you're also deleting over 1,000 elements from the Revit project. And in addition, a couple of views are being deleted. But the important thing here is you're going to be deleting a lot of stuff that is probably pretty critical for that project. And if you do that and then sync to Central, you're probably not going to have too many friends in the office. So we can cancel that, not delete it. It gives you that nice slap on the wrist before you actually apply that delete to the project. Also with views, huge feature enhancement, right? We can slow double click, if I can get this right, slow double click on the view name, and it should, let's try this, of course, did it like 5 times earlier today. There we go. If you do a slow double click on the view name, you can rename it. So instead of our, trusted right click rename tool, now just like in other programs, you can do your slow double click to rename a view. And also with this, if you rename the view, instead of getting this really annoying pop-up every time you go to rename a level or a view, you might get this the first time. But if you check the checkbox to do not show and say yes or no, should be saying no, then it will rename the view. And the next time you go to rename a view, it's just going to go ahead and rename it without giving you that pop-up. So as long as you know what you're doing, that's fine. I clicked no, so that's kind of the safe way. People change names of the views, and it's also going to change the level if I say yes. So it's something you might want to inform your coworkers about if they haven't sat in on this presentation, that when you do rename the views and you say yes to that, it will rename the corresponding levels. So I like to usually just have a naming convention for the way that the views are set up, separate from the way that they're being displayed in the model, but that's totally up to you and your companies. So just a few things to strengthen the workflow in terms of the way that levels are set up and the views that are attached to the levels. Definitely a big part of that, something I think is a huge improvement, at least from a management perspective and managing the models, is not only when you go to delete, again, it's going to tell you a couple of views, but it's also telling you that a whole bunch of stuff. So even if a project manager goes into your project or opens up a project and is trying to look at something and deletes a level, they should know when they get this that a whole bunch of stuff is being deleted, that they should probably cancel that operation. Okay. This next thing is also something to really strengthen our Revit operating system or our Revit UI, user interface. So in Revit 2019, from the open dialog box, and I stress that, from the open dialog box, if you click on an old Revit project or a current Revit project, it will display the year version of that file right in the open dialog box. So instead of going to open and waiting for that project to upgrade or that family to upgrade, if you know that it's in Revit 2015, then you might need to go back to actually opening up Revit 2015 to open that file, or you might realize, whoops, I'm not opening this file up, in the right version, or you might be selecting the wrong family altogether. So you go to your newer folder of families, open them up in the current version. This does not allow for back versioning. So if anyone's getting excited, saving down or anything like that, all of the all of the product versioning and the way that it works is still the same. This is just enhanced where it shows us what year the file is created in. One thing that I find kind of silly that I want to point out to everyone is while you're working in the project, so we're trying to bring families into this project, insert tab, load family, go into your family library, choose the family. It does not display through your load menus. So that's why I wanted to stress that it will only show, and this is another thing I don't like, the defaults don't hold to go back to your Imperial libraries, but that will only show the version through the open dialog box. I could see this being something included in a release update or a hot fix. It's pretty new, so maybe no one has pointed that out yet, but it's something that I find kind of silly, because if we're going to insert families into the Revit project that are created in 2012, then obviously you're going to have to sit there and wait for it to be upgraded, and you probably don't want to be loading in families that are 7 years out of date, but just something to watch out for there. Okay, let me go through this stuff kind of quickly. I know I only have a few minutes before Q&A, so for creating, so we're kind of in the create phase now. One of the feature enhancements here, I'm not going to go through the slides, I'll just keep it in Revit, but one thing that we can do now in section views, elevations, plans, you can now snap to and dimension to curved objects. So instead of trying to create reference planes or invisible lines to dimension to off of objects, you can now dimension directly to curves. Pretty big deal. And this also works. So right now I'm in the, I believe this is just a detail view. But one of the other things that they've enhanced is when you do have a section of something that's curved, like a pipe or a railing, it will also allow you to, see, we've got that section, there's a railing in there. That's at the back of the railing. I found that it only allows if the railing is being cut by the section line. Maybe not in the case of the railing, but it's nice even in just the detail lines that we can, I don't think that's actually being cut. Maybe it is. But you can dimension to arcs. So in drafting views, like the one I have here, actually this is a detail view, so that's a section. I don't know why this one's not working, but you should be able to dimension to, maybe you can't start the dimension to that object. Well, still not picking that one up, or that one. Oh. But you can dimension to curved objects instead of having to create some reference planes or invisible lines to dimension to at the top or the bottom of those. Some of the other enhancements to the creation stuff, if you have any railings, you now have the ability to, let me change this. You now have the ability to split a railing without actually going into the sketch and changing it. So if I go split, delete inner segment, split that railing into a couple of pieces there. I didn't delete it in the middle, but delete inner segment. So splitting railings, you can use the split command to do that. Some of the other enhancements for per discipline, we've got a lot of improvements on the structural side with steel detailing. So there's a whole new steel tab that has things like creating welds and connections. I'll actually go back to my slide deck for this one. So dimensioning curves, split railings. and then detailed steel. So now in Revit, we have this whole set of steel detailing that does not require us loading in any parts from steel extension. This automatically is loaded into Revit 2019. So if you're trying to do plate details, coping details, put in welds or bolts, this is all included in that steel tab. Also so like I mentioned, the whole library of the parametric steel connections are already preloaded into Revit. So if we're trying to load in a specific steel component, steel connection settings when you're in Revit, you can choose the available connections, load them into the project, and then use them in the project to detail your steel connections out. And even just with the documentation of this, we can document and dimension to those connections. So if you're trying to detail anything in 3D with the steel connections, you now have that ability. You can also schedule out bolts and plates to derive that information from the project. Some improvements to rebar shapes. There's shape recognition and there's shape codes assigned to the different shapes. So it allows for scheduling of the actual fabricated rebar. I don't know how many people are utilizing these tools, but in the past, they were pretty basic and pretty tough to deal with. But now we can create custom shapes and we can run a rebar schedule. So for those structural engineers, again, this is stuff that has been requested for a while. We used to have to use other programs. Now it's all in one place in Revit. So enhancing the 3D workflows for rebar and scheduling that. Okay. This is just a real quick one. New content, all of the 2018 content is now included in the 2019 install. Autodesk, I think, felt it was really important to point out that they added their Autodesk Foundation chair under the seating components in the family library. So there's this new chair. Also, sample models and new content library available for German languages. So to automate, again, this is kind of focused more on the structural side, but precast automation for lattice and girder slabs. And this enables third-party plugins to automate mechanisms for precast. So if there's any developers out there that are trying to create new utilities for the precast content, they unlock the API so that they can get in there and create additional utilities. So a lot of the discipline enhancements that were added this year did have pretty good focus on structure. There's a couple here at the end that I'm about to show. This connect, so the only thing under connect is the ability to import Rhino. So we can now import Rhino directly into Revit. So just import CAD and choose your 3DM Rhino file to import it in to a project or into a family. The IFC support, we can actually, I think it's IFC, let's see, I have it in my notes here. It's the newest version or the latest version of IFC is supported. Previously, invalid elements that were created in newer versions or published in newer versions of IFC didn't come in cleanly. Now they do. So the newest version of IFC is supported, and all of those elements can be copied and mirrored. So if you're importing stuff in, before we weren't able to just copy around those instances, now you have the ability to do that with IFC. And then finally, the last thing that I have for information that we're getting, this is more specific to MEP, and even more specifically than that to plumbing and piping, but we have parallel pump sets, so you can control proper sizing without having to worry about all of those flow rates and the order that things are connected to a system. So in the past, there was kind of a tug and pull between settings and getting stuff to calculate out the right way. Through the new information, the things that they changed in the settings for pump systems and flow direction, those complex piping networks, you don't have to worry about changing the flow rates on things at the end of the system or the beginning of the system. As long as your families are created correctly, this stuff should read independent of the order that you place them into the system. So this is a huge enhancement for calculating things like head loss in plumbing systems. I know those are more discipline specific, but they were pretty big enhancements in terms of creating piping networks. Okay, so let's see.
One moment while I end today's recording.